there is an enormous dishonesty at times when we talk about both sides. The reach for an equivalence where there is none is fundamentally dishonest. Oh, he's fascist and he's kind of old. I don't know. That's dishonest.
They try and compare you to MTG. How do you feel about that?
She's not on the level, okay? Like, that's just what it is. No, I mean, it's not, but whatever.
During a recent Q&A session with progressive political commentator Mehdi Hasan, Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez made fun of Marjorie Taylor Greene and shredded the enlightened centrist tropes of false equivalences and bothsidesism, and we have to talk about it. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bell before you go. I'd greatly appreciate it. Folks, this is like catnip to me. This is the ultimate dream team combination. You've got Mehdi Hasan, my favorite mainstream progressive political commentator. You got AOC, one of my favorite Democratic elected officials. And then they're talking about, and making fun of and debunking and refuting these enlightened centrist tropes like false equivalences and bothsidesism that we see everywhere in political commentary and, quite frankly, in the mainstream media. If you criticize Donald Trump, you have to criticize Joe Biden to establish you're objective and you're serious. If you criticize the Republicans about something, you got to find something to criticize the Democrats about in the very next sentence. Otherwise, you're a partisan hack. And again, this is the false equivalence, especially when there are meaningful differences between both sides. So we're going to play these two clips from AOC and Mehdi Hasan and unpack them together.
I know everyone's going to say, well, of course you're going to say this, which is leaning towards not just resisting, but telling the truth. I mean, there is an enormous dishonesty at times when we talk about both sides. The reach for an equivalence where there is none is fundamentally dishonest. And I think we need to be clear about that. This idea that we're going to, he's fascist and he's kind of old. I don't know. That's dishonest. It's dishonest. And in my view, it actually belies really awful intent.
The far left wants healthcare and the far right likes Nazis.
I see this too when people,
They try and compare you to MTG. How do you feel about that?
She's not on the level, okay? Like, that's just what it is.
It's hilarious. But again, everything she's saying is absolutely true. We're going to play the second clip, and then Mehdi jumps in there at the end as well. And then, again, we will unpack it all together.
I do think that there is a moving away, at least in terms of those who are running for office, from trying to both sides everything. But it really is a major issue, because when we talk about equivocating between two things that are in no way comparable, it is dishonest. And it runs, to me, contrary to what the spirit of journalism is, which is trying to get to the truth of the matter. And sometimes that means one person is more right than the other. And it doesn't make you biased. It means that we checked everyone's claims, and one person maybe was not as honest or not as grounded as the other.
Yeah, there's not two sides to Holocaust denial or climate change denial or election denial.
And that absurdism is what we've paved the way. There's been this momentum that's paved the way to that because of that practice.
So listen, I think everything they said is absolutely true. It's like they watch Pondering Politics. At the end of the day, we have to be able to recognize meaningful distinctions between two or more things, right? I use crime as a metaphor, right? So there are multiple types of crime and multiple, categories of crime and multiple severities of crime, right? So shoplifting is a crime, right? I'm not saying shoplifting is good, but it is less important. It's less severe. It's less dangerous than murder or mass murder, right? And so if you have two people and you're comparing person A and person B, and all you say is that, well, they're both criminals, and then you move on, but in reality, one is a mass murderer and the other one's a shoplifter, you are being imprecise. You are being inaccurate. You're almost being dishonest. I think you could easily make that argument, especially if you have time to acknowledge those meaningful distinctions. Otherwise, you're contributing to a false equivalence. Disease is another one, right? The cold sucks. The flu sucks. The flu is potentially lethal. Stage 4 cancer is much worse than either of them, including the flu, right? And so it would be a false equivalence to say to somebody, you're a doctor and you're evaluating 2 patients and, well, they're both sick, but one has the cold and the other one has stage 4 cancer. One is more sick than the other and probably needs more scrutiny and attention paid than the other, right? It's the same thing with politics. I'm not saying that you can't ever criticize the Democratic Party or President Biden. Mehdi Hasan and AOC both do that all the time, especially Mehdi Hasan, right? Because he's a journalist. But it's important to remember, especially when there are meaningful differences, to acknowledge those meaningful differences. And Mehdi is great at this. Mehdi, to me, is the gold standard in this respect because he has obvious, tangible, passionate, sincere disagreements with the Biden administration, particularly with respect to how it has managed the war in Israel. And yet, at no point does Mehdi Hasan even suggest that Donald Trump and Joe Biden are the same. Like AOC says, one's kind of old, the other one's a fascist. She could also have added that fascist is also really old. Donald Trump is also very, very old, right? So, but the problem is, and you may recall from my conversation with Don Lemon, a professional journalist who used to be in the mainstream media, CNN, heavyweight, a household name for many people. Even he said that the mainstream media has this instinct to try to avoid being tarred and feathered and have their feelings hurt as liberal media, that if they criticize the right or Republicans, they feel obligated to create a false equivalence and reach for something to criticize Democrats and the left on. That's insane. That's absurd. That's like, again, another metaphor. You're a parent with 2 kids. One commits an obviously great offense, stealing or, something like the child in question does something incredibly wrong. And so you punish them. But then you turn to their sibling and like, well, I got to punish you too because I can't be seen as biased. Well, no, you're acting appropriately. It's unfair. It's irrational. It's ridiculous to spend as much time, effort, and energy going after the lesser of 2 evils in the situation, the Democratic Party. You can criticize all you want, but I think any sort of good faith, honest criticism has to recognize the meaningful distinctions. And the meaningful distinctions between the 2 parties are abundantly clear. The Republican Party is an authoritarian cult of personality. They're just objectively worse than the Democratic Party, particularly with respect to their elected officials. And it's irresponsible and irrational and kind of silly and pathetic to suggest otherwise and to try to create some sort of false equivalence, some sort of political affirmative action for the GOP simply because they suck much more and that makes you uncomfortable. So love those clips, love that interaction. Let me know what you think in the comments.